You don't buy a cabin for 12 cents unless something ugly is tied to the deed. The door banged open under Amos's shoulder and let a throat of cold into the dark. Dust lifted off the floorboards like something alive. The rope creaked before his eyes found it, the slow sway, the whisper of hemp against a rafter he could not see, only feel by the way the night shifted around the weight it held. She hung there in a gray wash of moon through a busted window. Bare feet. A dress once blue, now the color of rain turned bad in a barrel. A coin of light found her face and made her cheeks hollow as a skull's. He stood there with his breath trapped behind his teeth and the wind threading through the chinks, whispering like a gossip in church. Somewhere outside a meadowlark called the hour as if it mattered. Amos's right hand moved without asking him, found his knife, then stopped at the rasp of boot soles behind him. No one. Only the house settling on its stones and the rope making that tired, gentle sound, like a chair pushed back from a table that would never be sat at again. But let's go back to where it all started. The cabin had sat for years at the far edge of Parson Creek on a finger of cottonwoods where the land sloped into a wash thick with chokecherry and willow. Folks passing on the high road kept their eyes forward, as if looking down at it might make it look back. Weather had done what time always does out here, but there was a second kind of wear on the place, as if a man could tire a house with the wrong kind of living. In town that afternoon, the auction bell clanged lazy and mean. The county clerk, a narrow man with a clean white shirt a shade too clean for Kansas mud, squinted up at the sun and said, "We'll start at $2 as the paper says." He held the deed like it might bite. No one spoke. Hats tugged lower, boots scuffed. A teamster scratched the inside of his elbow and wouldn't look at the clerk. A boy with a rawhide whip made a little crack in the air and got his ear boxed by his daddy for the trouble. $2, the clerk repeated. This is a good bargain for a man wanting 80 acres and a cabin. Good bargain don't mean good luck, someone said. The clerk's lips thinned. $1.50. Silence held the square. A cloud went across the sun and put a dull coat over everything. Amos watched a fly crawl the length of his horse's ear and thought how quiet it gets before a storm, even when there aren't any clouds to speak of. $1, the clerk said, with a little show of cheer he didn't feel. 90 cents. 75. 50. Amos shifted in the saddle. His left knee had started to complain lately when he sat too long. He straightened it, listened to the wood of the saddle creak, and looked at the faces around him. Men he knew and men he nodded to but did not know well enough to bury. Every one of them had a reason to keep still. 25, the clerk said through teeth that wanted to grind. 10. 2 bits, called a saloon runner from the edge of the square. That's 25, not 10. Fine, the clerk snapped. 10. 5. No one moved. A dog yawned and laid his head down on his paws in the dust. Amos pulled the brim of his hat down and said, almost to his horse, 12 cents. The phrase hung there as foolish as a drunk preacher's prayer. A smirk made a tour of a few faces. One of the blacksmith's boys whispered, and the blacksmith clapped a hard hand to the back of his head without turning. 12 cents, the clerk said, the taste of the number making his mouth go crooked. Any other bid? 12 cents to Mr. Amos Hawthorne. He mispronounced it as if the name might be the hex. Amos didn't correct him. Sold. You going to sleep there, Hawthorne? Came a voice from near the livery. Amos glanced over. Ezekiel Pike, called Zeke by men who owed him money, and Mr. Pike by those who wished they didn't. Zeke's smile showed a chip in his front tooth he liked to show when he thought he had the better of a thing. Neighbor by map only is spread a stitch away downwind of Amos's and twice as loud. Ain't you got enough roofs? Zeke said, Were you buying it for kindling? Amos's horse flicked its tail. Amos folded the paper once, twice, slid it into his inside pocket. Ground's ground. Not that ground, Zeke said, and his hand made a small flick, a useless blessing in the direction of Parson Creek. Don't say I didn't nod to you. On his ride out, the sun walked low and slow to the west until it found that thin spot on the horizon where it can't get any lower and decides, like a tired man, to just fall. The prairie turned to fire and then to coal, and the shadows of the cottonwoods grew long enough to trip a horse. Amos rode with his hand near the saddle horn and his eyes in the spaces between the trees. A jackrabbit darted and stopped and thought better of it. His place, for miles shy of the creek, was a clean scratch of fence and barn and house, whitewashed in the spring and already taking on the small, honest dirt of summer. He didn't stop. He kept on past where the ground changed its mind about being flat, over the shallow rise where the grass went pale, down where the creek bent, and set the smell of water into the evening. The cabin waited. A shape made of older dark nested in the new dark. Amos pulled up. The mare shifted and snorted soft, ears turning like they'd heard a thing his human ears hadn't chosen yet. He swung down, tied her to a low branch, and stood for a long moment listening. Crickets. Far coyotes fretting questions through the last of the light. The creek whispering its long, one-note song. He didn't think about ghosts. He didn't think about the woman whose name he hadn't said out loud in 3 winters, who had made a home out of 2 rooms and a stove and laughter like a bell. Grief will do what grief does if you let it, and he'd learned to keep it in the barn with the other animals that needed tending. Feed it at dawn, pat it at dusk, never bring it into the house. The door's plank had a notch worn right where a thumb wants to be. That meant someone had stands and leans there more times than a man should. He pressed and felt the tug of a latch, the crackle of something's nest in the lintel. The lantern he'd brought coughed to life and laid a bowl of honey light over the first 10 feet of his new, cheap estate. A table, 3-legged chair, stove squatting like an old woman, a flattened Bible with a handprint in the dust of the cover, as if someone used it to press a letter and left the letter under it, forgetting it mattered. In that circle of light the world felt contained. Outside it, things breathed. He took 2 more steps. The light went far enough to find the rafter, to find the rope, to find the small body at the end of it. The knife came into his hand without asking. He didn't rush. He heard the dry leather of his belt as he moved. The hangknot was a good one, done by someone who knew the knot the way a man knows a psalm. She swayed. The lantern light licked across her as she moved and made her eyes into little pools he could not look at. A curl of hair, brown with a bit of red, caught just so by the flame, stuck damp to her throat. Amos felt his knee begin to ache the way it did when he stood too long after a day of mending fence. It steadied him. Pain will do that if you let it. He touched 2 fingers to her wrist. Cool skin. He waited for the small miracle that sometimes comes late if a man is patient enough to look foolish. The quiet radiated like heat from a stove that has already gone out. Lord, he said, and what he meant was something not fit for a church. He looked around for a chair to climb, something to take the weight. The 3-legged chair blinked up at him like it would laugh and dump him if he tried. He set the lantern on the table and put his foot on the table and tested it. It held. He tested the beam above, his hand leaving a clean mark in the dust like a last word. Don't, a voice rasped behind him. He turned. The door had the night in it, and the night had a shape. A boy, maybe 15, thin as a whippet and holding a rifle that would thump his shoulder purple if he ever fired it. The barrel's mouth looked at Amos like an eye too curious to be dangerous. It ain't for you, the boy said. His voice had been sanded by not enough water, and he swallowed like each one cost him a cent. They said to leave her. Said it was a warning. Amos looked at the girl again. The line of her mouth didn't make sense as death. Something about the slackness had mercy in it. The boy's hands shook in little circles that made the rifle's front sight wag. Whose warning? Amos asked. The boy blinked slow, as if he hadn't yet settled on whether to bother answering a thing that didn't change the shape the world had taken. He darted his gaze to the corner. In the lantern's slant, Amos saw it. A sign cut into the wall with a knife, a rude diamond with a tail. Old-timers used that mark on strays when they couldn't afford a brand iron. He knew it too well. He had put that mark into a bull's hide years ago when he'd run fence lines and nights together and thought himself a different creature than he turned out to be. You stole this place cheap, the boy said. You can keep it if you keep your hands off. The rope creaked. Time was taking its little steps without asking permission. Amos could hear his mare shift again, as if the smell of the room had reached her. Outside, somewhere very close, there was the tiniest of sounds like a boot toe not wanting to scrape. It might have been a mouse. It might have been men. He took his foot off the table, slow, so it wouldn't groan. He lifted the lantern, which threw the walls farther back, and brought the mark into clearer view. The girl swayed once more and turned in the air toward him, and in that turning the lantern light caught a patch of skin at her throat where the rope pushed, and he saw a bruise in the shape of fingers, not the burn of a noose. Sometimes the thing you think you're looking at is a show for the thing you're supposed to see. He looked at the boy and at the trembling barrel, and at the door full of night that might be empty and might not, and he felt the weight of 12 cents heavy as a gold bar in his pocket. You go and put that knife away, the boy asked. Amos slid the blade back a hair, not enough to hide it, enough to let the boy breathe. He let the lantern's light settle on her face. The blue of her dress gathered the glow and offered it back softer, and he thought, with a surprise that almost shamed him, that she looked like a person with a name. The wind brought the creek's cold breath into the room and set the rope to whispering again. Somewhere outside, a horse nickered, not his. Amos drew a breath he did not yet know what to do with. He had a choice to make that would tell the night what kind of man he was, and he could feel it waiting, polite as a judge who already knows how he'll rule. The boy's rifle stayed trained on Amos, but his arms sagged just enough that the barrel's aim wavered. Amos set the lantern down with a care that made no sound. The girl's shadow swung long across the cabin wall, a crooked pendulum. She was not much older than the boy holding that gun. 17 maybe. Maybe less. Put her down, Amos said low. The boy shook his head, a jerky motion, like something inside him was arguing hard. They said leave her be. Said she's proof. His throat worked, but his eyes darted anywhere except the girl's face. Proof. That word sat sour in Amos's ears. Proof of what, he didn't yet know, but the finger-shaped bruise at her throat told him it wasn't proof of her own doing. You one of Pike's boys? Amos asked. The boy flinched. That was answer enough. From outside came the low shuffle of hooves, not moving on, just waiting. Amos's gut tightened. He knew that patience. Zeke Pike's men weren't in a hurry because they'd already written how this night would end. Amos drew the knife back up slow, letting the boy see it in plain light. If she's proof they lied, he said. He put his boot on the table again, steady as stone, and sawed clean through the rope. The girl's body sagged into his arms like a sack of seed. She was lighter than she looked, bones sharp beneath cloth, but her weight carried a strange heat, not the still cold of a corpse. Amos's heart skipped. He pressed fingers against her neck, just under the jaw. A pulse, faint as moth wings. She ain't gone, Amos whispered. The boy's mouth opened. His rifle clattered to the floorboards. He was on his knees beside Amos in an instant, voice breaking. I thought she was dead. They told me she was dead. Amos lowered her onto the table. The lantern's glow brushed her face, and thin breath shuddered from her lips. Her chest rose, shallow but there. Amos gritted his teeth. The rope had not finished its work before someone left her. Or maybe someone meant her to linger like this, left as a warning, but not allowed the mercy of release. He cut the noose free from her neck and laid the rope aside like a snake that might still strike. What's her name? Amos asked. The boy swallowed. His eyes darted again, as if even saying it might put him in the ground. Finally he whispered Ruby. Ruby. The name fit like a stone in a sling, sharp, small, but bound to strike hard. Amos dipped a rag in his canteen and pressed it to her lips. She stirred faintly, lashes twitching against her pale skin. She needs more than a rag, Amos muttered. The boy's eyes brimmed wet. They'll come back if they know she's breathing. They're already outside, Amos said, keeping his voice even. Best decide quick who you're standing with. The boy looked at him, really looked now, as if weighing not just Amos's words, but the man behind them. His jaw worked like he wanted to speak, but couldn't pick a side of himself to let win. A thump sounded against the cabin wall. Not a knock, more like a reminder. Men outside shifting in their saddles, making sure Amos knew the night belonged to them. Amos touched the boy's shoulder. Help me lift her. Quiet. The boy hesitated, then nodded. Together, they carried Ruby to the back corner, laying her against a rolled blanket on the floor. Amos draped his coat over her, then returned to the table. The lantern light made his shadow stretch tall, almost touching the rope stub overhead. From beyond the door came Zeke Pike's voice, oily and sure of itself. You got yourself a bargain tonight, Amos. Hope she suits you. But some things ain't yours to take. Open up, and maybe we let you keep your skin along with your new house. The boy's breath caught. He grabbed Amos's arm, whispering fast, Don't open it. They'll shoot you down soon as the latch turns. Amos kept his gaze on the door. His mare's snort carried faint through the night, a sound he knew better than his own name. Beyond her, hoofbeats shifted like wolves circling. His eyes flicked to Ruby. Her lips moved barely. He leaned close. She breathed one word, a rasp of air but clear enough. Please. The boy heard it too. His face crumpled. Amos rose, rolling his shoulders slow, as if settling a yoke he'd carried before. His hand brushed the handle of his knife, then slid to the old Colt on his hip, worn smooth by years of fence-line duty. He drew a long breath, the kind a man takes when every next step will change the whole road. The door rattled. Zeke's voice again, harder now. "Last chance, Amos. Don't make me burn you out for 12 cents worth of stubborn." The lantern flame quivered. Ruby's chest lifted in a fragile rise. The boy's wide eyes darted from her to Amos, to the door, back again, searching for a path that wasn't there. Amos's hand tightened around the Colt. He knew the town would hear only Zeke's story come morning. Harboring a dying girl branded with another man's warning wasn't the sort of thing neighbors forgave. But he also knew the sound of that faint pulse, fragile yet stubborn as prairie grass through stone. He stepped toward the door, slow, boots heavy on the cabin floor. Each creak of the boards seemed loud enough to bring the whole gang crashing in. He stopped just short of the latch, voice calm, steady, carrying through the wood. "She ain't dead, Zeke. And if you want to finish what you started, you'll have to come through me." Silence outside. Then the slow scrape of a match against a box. A flare of light spilled under the door crack. Amos stood tall, Colt in hand, the boy trembling at his back, Ruby's shallow breath whispering in the dark. The night itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what kind of man Amos Hawthorne was about to be. The firelight outside died as quick as it flared. Someone had only wanted to spook him. Amos listened close. Hoof leather groaned. A spatter of laughter, the mean kind, stretched thin to hide nerves. Zeke Pike's voice followed, too smooth, too certain. "You always did keep to yourself, Amos. Figure maybe you'd learn to mind your own by now. That girl, she's marked. You understand? Marked by my hand, by my right. You don't want that trouble." Amos leaned his shoulder to the wall beside the door, Colt resting low, muzzle angled to the floorboards. "Trouble don't knock, Zeke. It just comes in." A pause. Then the creak of saddle leather and the shift of hooves, Zeke circling slow like a preacher pacing the pulpit. "You're buying yourself a grave, neighbor. 12 cents won't cover the stone." The boy behind Amos shivered, breath sharp. "They'll kill us," he whispered. Amos glanced at him. The lad's face was pale, but his jaw worked hard, trying to grind up some courage. "What's your name?" Amos asked. The boy blinked. "Jesse." "Well, Jesse," Amos said soft, "if we're going to be buried tonight, best we die standing." Jesse swallowed, and in his eyes Amos saw the moment something young in him cracked, leaving behind the kind of hardness the plains carve into a man too soon. Ruby stirred under the coat. Her hand twitched, fingers brushing air as if searching for something she couldn't reach. Amos knelt, brushing a damp curl from her brow. Her eyes fluttered half open. "You're safe," he said, though he knew safety was the last thing between these walls. "Stay quiet." Her lips moved. He bent close again, catching only fragments. "Not me, land," Zeke's voice cut through from outside. "Time's up." Then the scrape of boots, more than one. A lantern lifted, glow flooding the cracks in the door. Shadows stretched long, shifting across the cabin walls. Jesse's hands shook as he lifted the rifle. Amos laid a steady hand on the barrel, pushing it down just an inch. "Not yet," he whispered. The silence stretched tight, as a wire. Then 3 sharp raps on the door. Not a polite knock, a command. Amos stepped close, voice even. "This house is mine. Bought it clean, signed, and stamped. You don't cross this threshold." Zeke chuckled low. "Paper don't change blood, Amos. That girl's marked, and anyone sheltering her is marked the same." From the back wall, Ruby coughed, the sound raw, tearing. The noise carried through the door like a signal. A hush fell outside, followed by mutters. "She's alive," someone whispered. The murmurs swelled. Anger. Fear. A boot thumped the door hard enough to rattle the latch. Amos tightened his grip on the Colt. His heart drummed steady, not fast. He'd been in standoffs before, though never one that felt so much like judgment. He raised his voice, letting it carry. "She's breathing, Zeke. Which means she's owed the chance to speak for herself. Unless you're so scared of a girl's word that you'd rather hang her twice." The men outside shifted. He heard one spit, another curse under his breath. Zeke hissed for silence. "She won't speak. And even if she did, nobody'd listen." Jesse bristled, voice cracking but loud enough. "I'll listen." The words hung heavy in the cabin air, a boy's shout against a grown man's claim. The night swelled with hoofbeats in the distance, more riders coming down the trail. Amos felt his gut tighten. This wasn't going to stay a standoff much longer. Zeke would bring the whole Pike clan if he had to, and then fire would finish what rope couldn't. Amos looked at Ruby again. Her lips trembled, as if she had more words pressing but couldn't draw them past the pain. "Hold on," he whispered. He stood tall, Colt loose in his hand but steady, and turned back to the door. "You want her dead, Zeke, you'll have to drag her from my table with your own hands. But if you think I'll open this door to men who choke girls and hang them like scarecrows, you don't know me at all." Silence. Then the slow, cold laugh of Zeke Pike. "You always were a fool, Amos. But fools make good examples." Hooves scraped, circling. Lantern light danced wild through the cracks, shadows shifting like specters across the walls. Jesse swallowed, knuckles white on the rifle. Ruby breathed in short, ragged gasps. Amos's eyes never left the door. And then, faint but clear, the rhythm of more hoofbeats, not from Zeke's men, but from the North Trail. Not hurried, not charging. A steady line of riders cutting through the night. Zeke cursed under his breath. His men muttered uneasy. Amos kept his face impassive, though inside his heart clenched. He didn't know if these new riders were salvation or damnation, but he knew one thing for certain. The night had only just begun to pass its judgment. The hoofbeats grew clearer, iron striking hardpan in a rhythm too steady for drifters, too measured for outlaws. Amos's ears caught the cadence, military or men who wanted to be mistaken for it. Zeke's gang shifted in their saddles, the bravado bleeding thin. Nobody liked surprise company in the dark. Through a slit in the cabin wall, Amos saw shadows cresting the rise. Half a dozen riders at least, lanterns swinging, light glancing off rifles cradled easy but ready. Their leader carried himself tall in the saddle, shoulders square, hat brim sharp. As they drew closer, Amos recognized the cut of the coats, blue will turn brown with trail dust. Union men, or what was left of them, years after the war had dried out but never really ended. Zeke spat low, the sound carrying, "Damn scavengers." Then louder to his men, "Keep still. Don't twitch." The riders pulled up a stone's throw from a cabin. Their leader nudged his horse forward. "Evenin'," he called, voice deep, calm but carrying weight. "Name's Captain Avery. Heard tell of trouble on this side of the creek." Zeke shifted his lantern higher, painting his grin orange. "No trouble here, Captain. Just neighbors settling accounts." Inside, Jesse's breath trembled. Amos put a finger to his lips, quieting him. Ruby stirred, a low groan escaping, thin but alive. The sound sliced the silence. Captain Avery's gaze flicked toward the cabin. "Somebody hurt?" Zeke's smile faltered. "None of your concern." Avery's horse pawed the dirt. The man didn't blink. "Everything this side of the creek is my concern. Law's thin out here, but it ain't dead." Amos weighed the moment. He could stay silent, keep his head low, hope the bluecoats rode on. But Ruby's pulse, faint against his fingers earlier, still beat in his ears. He stepped toward the door, raising his voice. "There's a girl in here," Amos said. "She's alive, barely. Pike tried to hang her." The night froze. Zeke's face hardened, grin gone. "You're a liar, Amos. Always were. That girl's mine by right. She was caught thieving, consorting with savages. Law says she swings." Avery studied him, long enough that the horses began to snort at the silence. "Law says she gets a hearing." He nodded toward the cabin. "Open the door, mister." Jesse's eyes went wide. Amos steadied him with a look. He slid the Colt back into its holster but left his hand loose nearby. He drew the latch slow and swung the door open. Lantern light spilled in, catching Ruby's pale face where she lay under Amos's coat. Avery's jaw tightened. He dismounted, boots crunching gravel as he stepped inside. Ruby's eyes fluttered half open. Her lips moved, barely sound. Amos bent to catch it again. One word slipped out, "Land." Avery crouched beside her, eyes narrowing at the bruises on her throat. He brushed his fingers just above her pulse, then stood, gaze hardening as it landed on Zeke Pike. "You said she was dead." Zeke's hand twitched toward his belt, but stopped short under the weight of 6 rifles leveled from Avery's men. "She ain't but a half-breed thief," Zeke spat. "You know what they're worth." Avery's voice went flat as hammered steel. "She's worth more than the rope you used on her, and more than the dirt you think you own." Zeke's men shifted, eyes flicking between their leader and the rifles in the dark. Loyalty weighed against survival. Amos felt the air tighten, the moment stretching toward a break. He looked at Ruby, at the faint fire still clinging to her breath, and knew it came down to the choice he'd already made when he cut her down. "She needs water-food care," Amos said, voice steady. "If she's to tell her story, she needs to live long enough to speak it." Avery met his gaze. A long pause passed between them, unspoken but heavy. Finally, the captain gave a single nod. "Then she'll live." Outside, Zeke Pike cursed loud, fury boiling over the top of his control. "You think you can steal from me, Avery? From me? This land's marked. My mark. Anyone who stands against it stands against Pike blood." Avery stepped back out the door, his coat brushing the frame. His men shifted in tight formation. Amos caught the faint glimmer of bayonets, steel thirsty under lantern glow. Ruby stirred again, whispering against the dark. "Land, not his," her voice cracked, but the words cut sharp. Jesse's head jerked toward her, hope sparking. Amos's stomach turned cold. Whatever story Ruby carried, it was about more than survival. It was about the ground under their boots, the very thing men like Zeke Pike would kill and hang for. And now the question hung heavier than the noose. Whose land was this really? And how many bodies would it claim before morning answered? The night held its breath. Lanterns hissed. Horses stamped nervously in the dirt. Zeke Pike sat high in the saddle, his grin gone to a thin snarl. His men fidgeted at his back, hands brushing gun handles, eyes darting toward Captain Avery's rifles. Amos stood just inside the cabin door, Colt hanging easy at his hip, Jesse pale but rigid beside him. Behind them Ruby whispered, her voice like wind through dry grass. "Not his land," the word settled in Amos's ears heavier than lead. He looked down at her, the bruises on her throat dark against her skin. She was fighting the rope still, fighting Pike's mark, fighting to speak. Avery must have heard, too. His head turned slightly, gaze narrowing on Amos, as if asking if he heard the same thing. Amos gave a single nod. "Captain," Zeke said, his voice hot with anger, "you think you can walk in and strip me of what's mine? I branded this land, my blood's in it. My father's before me." Avery's tone stayed flat. "Law says blood don't own earth. Deeds do." Zeke spat into the dirt. "Deeds ain't worth 12 cents, and you know it. That paper don't change what's owed me." Amos stepped forward, voice carrying steady. 12 cents or $12, it's mine by record. Signed and stamped. But it ain't about that, is it? It's about what you buried here, Zeke. What you hung here." Zeke's eyes cut sharp to him. For a heartbeat, Amos saw something flicker, fear, or maybe recognition. Ruby coughed, each sound tearing her chest. Her hand lifted weakly, pointing toward the far wall of the cabin where the crude diamond with a tail had been carved. Her lips shaped words, faint but clear enough this time. "Not Pike, promise." Jesse's eyes went wide. "She's saying this land ain't his." He turned on Zeke, voice shaking but loud. "You told me it was marked for Pike. You said, 'Shut your mouth, boy.'" Zeke's shout cracked the night. His horse danced sideways, ears back. He yanked the reins hard, glaring at Jesse like he meant to burn him down, with eyes alone. But Jesse stood stiff, rifle clutched tight, though it trembled in his hands. For the first time, Amos saw the boy not as Zeke's tool, but as a son torn between fear and truth. Avery raised a hand. His men cocked rifles, iron clicking in the dark. "That's enough," the captain said. His voice carried like stone dropped in a well. No echo, just final. "The girl speaks. She's witness. We'll hear her before judgment." Zeke's jaw clenched. His fingers twitched near the butt of his revolver, but he didn't draw. He wasn't fool enough to trade 6 rifles for pride, not yet. "You'll regret this, Avery," he spat. "You and Hawthorne both. That girl's words won't save you when the town takes my side." Amos stepped out onto the threshold. The lantern light caught his face, weathered and lined, but steady as carved oak. "Town's heard your side plenty. Maybe it's time they heard hers." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was tight, drawn like a bowstring. Ruby's shallow breathing filled the cabin behind him. Jesse's knuckles shone white on the rifle. Avery's men shifted their weight, boots grinding gravel, eyes locked on Pike's gang. Finally Avery spoke, his tone like judgment rendered. "Come first light. She'll be taken to Fort Laramie. Doctor, food, a roof, and a hearing before the magistrate. If she's fit to tell her tale, she'll tell it under law. Anyone that tries to stop that," he let the pause stretch, gaze burning, into Zeke. "Answers to me." Zeke sneered, but his men had already begun to shrink back, spines bending beneath the weight of leveled rifles. A curse tore from his throat, sharp and raw, before he wheeled his horse. "This ain't finished," he roared. "Not by half." Hooves thundered as Pike and his riders dragged themselves into the dark, curses trailing like smoke. The quiet afterward felt louder than gunfire. Amos's hand slid from the Colt, though he didn't holster it. His eyes followed the dust Pike left behind until it melted into night. Inside, Ruby's eyes flickered open again. She looked at Amos, at Jesse, then at Avery standing like a wall in the doorway. Her lips parted, and the words came faint but steady this time. "This land was promised to my people." The room went still. Avery's gaze sharpened. Jesse blinked fast, confusion breaking across his face. Amos felt the words sink deep, deeper than Pike's mark carved into the wall. Promised land. Not Pike's. Not Amos's 12-cent bargain. Something older, heavier. A truth worth killing or dying for. Amos set his jaw. He knew then the danger hadn't passed with Pike's retreat. It had only just begun.